There is an enduring cultural myth that veteran paranormal researchers are utterly fearless figures, armed with cutting edge sensors and perpetually eager to spend the darkest hours of the night in any forsaken structure in search of empirical truth. Yet, when one examines the private field logs and confidential archives belonging to the oldest parapsychological societies in the United States, a far more unsettling reality begins to surface from the shadows. Across the ancient landscape of New England, there exist specific historic estates where human curiosity abruptly reaches its absolute limit. In these rare locations, seasoned investigators who have spent 3 or 4 decades documenting inexplicable phenomena do not merely conclude their investigations. They deliberately pack away their instruments, seal the heavy iron gates behind them, and take an unspoken oath never to return under any circumstances. To understand the profound weight of this collective refusal, one must recognize the unique historical and geographic tapestry that defines this northeastern corner of the continent. Since the early years of the 17th century, the region was forged through unforgiving coastal winters, brutal conflicts over territory, unbending puritanical fanaticism, and catastrophic maritime losses that claimed entire lineages. As shipping magnates and industrial titans amassed unimaginable fortunes throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, they erected colossal mansions upon grounds that had already absorbed centuries of human anguish. These timber and granite structures did not merely observe the passage of time. They seemed to absorb the volatile residue of sudden deaths, dynastic ruin, esoteric obsessions, and institutional neglect. When researchers crossed these thresholds expecting passive residual hauntings only to encounter a conscious, hostile force capable of physical interference, the boundary between scientific inquiry and sheer survival immediately collapses. Nowhere is this sudden descent into raw hostility more terrifyingly evident than within the imposing walls of the Sylvester Pierce Mansion, nestled in the quiet city of Gardner, Massachusetts. Erected in the late 19th century by a prominent furniture manufacturer, the monumental Victorian manor with its towering ceilings, hand-carved walnut paneling, and more than 20 opulent rooms was intended to stand as the definitive monument to industrial triumph. Yet tragedy struck almost immediately after the family took up residence, beginning with the agonizing death of Pierce's young wife, which initiated a downward spiral of bankruptcies, unsolved homicides, and accounts of inhabitants descending into sudden, incurable madness within the upper chambers. Over the decades, the mansion deteriorated from a symbol of high society into a neglected boarding house, all while concentrating an increasingly volatile energy that would eventually shock the parapsychological community. What ultimately forced modern researchers to place the Pierce Mansion on a strict blacklist was not the presence of faint apparitions, but the unrelenting physical violence directed at anyone attempting to document the premises. Specialized teams conducting controlled environmental studies in the second-floor bedrooms reported sustained physical assaults, including deep, burning scratches materializing spontaneously across bare skin, violent shoves against solid walls, and localized temperature drops so severe that human breath instantly condensed into thick plumes of vapor in the middle of summer. Most unnerving of all were the repeated electronic voice phenomena capturing direct vocal threats whispered at precise conversational volumes, calling investigators by their actual names and demanding their immediate departure. After multiple documented instances of experienced researchers suffering acute respiratory distress and severe panic episodes that required immediate evacuation into the night, leading parapsychological groups formally classified the property as unsafe for extended nocturnal vigils. Traveling south toward the opulent coastal bluffs of Newport, Rhode Island, where the elite of the Gilded Age competed to build the grandest palaces on the Atlantic shore, stands the formidable stone facade of Belcourt Castle. Designed in the late 19th century by master architect Richard Morris Hunt for the eccentric Oliver Belmont, the property was envisioned as a fusion of a French Renaissance hunting lodge and a personal sanctuary for an extraordinary collection of dark antiquities. Belmont spent years scouring the European continent, systematically purchasing medieval armor sets, stained glass from desecrated chapels, and carved furnishings salvaged from castles that had witnessed torture and executions. By concentrating hundreds of artifacts steeped in centuries of bloodshed within a single home, Belmont inadvertently transformed the soaring Gothic halls of Belcourt into a spiritual pressure chamber that defies rational explanation. Over several decades, investigators attempting to evaluate the castle's acoustic and electromagnetic properties found themselves confronted by phenomena that routinely subverted scientific methodology. The most notorious manifestation centers upon two intricately carved 16th-century oak chairs situated in the grand ballroom, where individuals attempting to sit were repeatedly repelled by an invisible solid wall of force that threw them violently to the polished floor while plunging their bodies into an icy numbness. Moreover, the suits of plate armor standing along the gallery corridors were frequently documented shifting their posture between automated camera sweeps, accompanied by the dry scraping of iron against stone in sections where no living person stood. Following an expedition during which thermal imaging cameras captured massive humanoid heat signatures standing motionless at the top of the central staircase, staring down at the researchers, the team dismantled their monitoring stations and categorically refused to return for their scheduled second night. Further north, in the industrial heartland of Fall River, Massachusetts, an unassuming clapboard home on 2nd Street holds the memory of one of the most gruesome domestic tragedies in American history. It was within this modest, austere residence in the late summer of 1892 that Andrew Borden and his wife Abby were savagely bludgeoned to death with an axe in broad daylight, setting off a judicial spectacle that captivated the nation. Yet, beyond the endless historical debates surrounding the guilt or innocence of Lizzie Borden, the true horror of the property lies in the strange atmospheric stasis that seems to have permanently trapped that fateful morning inside the timber framework, creating an ongoing sensory distortion that tests the psychological endurance of any researcher who attempts to analyze it. When forensic specialists and parapsychologists equipped with barometric and acoustic monitoring gear attempted a continuous 48-hour vigil inside the guest bedroom where the body of Abby Borden was discovered, the environment quickly revealed an aggressive physiological resistance. Multi-sensor arrays repeatedly recorded sudden localized spikes in atmospheric pressure that produced immediate vertigo and severe disorientation among the research crew. High-fidelity audio recordings captured the rhythmic, heavy thud of boots ascending the narrow pine staircase, pausing precisely outside the locked bedroom door, accompanied by the ragged sound of heavy breathing inches away from the microphones. The overwhelming sensation of claustrophobic dread and the onset of waking sleep paralysis among veteran investigators led several institutional directors to conclude that the house poses a genuine psychological hazard that makes sustained scientific inquiry impossible. Deep in the mountainous northwestern corner of Connecticut, hidden beneath the dense and suffocating canopy of dark entry forest, lie the crumbling stone cellar holes of Dudleytown. Settled in the mid-18th century by English colonists, This remote community rapidly became synonymous with an unprecedented string of catastrophic misfortunes. From mysterious epidemics and blighted harvests to fatal lightning strikes and a terrifying wave of suicides and sudden psychiatric collapses that decimated the population. By the early 20th century, the village was entirely abandoned and reclaimed by the wilderness, leaving behind only moss-covered foundation stones that seemed to maintain a profound unnatural silence capable of banishing every trace of native wildlife. Investigative expeditions that penetrated the perimeter of Dudleytown have consistently described an absolute absence of biological sound, noting that birds cease to sing and insects fall silent the moment one steps across the ancient stone property boundaries. Far more disquieting, however, is the violent navigational chaos that routinely affects modern orientation equipment, with magnetic compasses spinning erratically and satellite transceivers losing signal cohesion directly over the ruined cellars. Documented testimonies from independent researchers recount being stalked through the underbrush by towering, formless shadows moving at impossible speeds, accompanied by sudden waves of debilitating nausea and irrational terror that compelled them to abandon expensive equipment in their haste to escape. With local authorities strictly closing the area to the public under penalty of arrest, the paranormal research community broadly acknowledged that the dark soil of Dudleytown must never be disturbed. Perched high atop a commanding granite ridge overlooking the black waters of Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire, Kimball Castle stands as another imposing testament to isolated grandeur. Constructed in the final decade of the 19th century by railroad magnate Benjamin Kimball, the castle was fashioned from massive blocks of locally quarried granite to evoke the defensive fortresses of medieval Europe. While originally intended as a luxurious summer refuge for an aristocratic family, the castle's legacy was quickly overshadowed by severe familial isolation, the premature passing of heirs, and decades of neglect that allowed the elements to batter the stone towers while grim rumors circulated through the surrounding valleys. Those research groups that secured temporary access to the interior of Kimball Castle discovered that the immense granite walls appeared to store a hostile residual intelligence that actively resisted human intrusion. Automated cameras positioned in the central hallway repeatedly filmed heavy oak doors slamming shut against latches with tremendous velocity, despite the total absence of measurable airflow. Even more troubling was the acute cognitive exhaustion that systematically afflicted researchers, with team members suffering transient short-term memory loss and profound depersonalization within 2 hours of crossing into the northern tower. Recognizing that the combination of physical architectural hazards and severe disorientation created an unacceptable safety risk, prominent research organizations closed their case files on the castle and ceased all further field operations. In the quiet rural landscape of Harrisville, Rhode Island, an 18th-century farmhouse resting on ancient stone foundations became the epicenter of one of the most intense and harrowing investigations in modern parapsychological history. The multi-level timber homestead, built over 2 centuries ago near wetlands that witnessed early colonial hardships, accumulated generations of unrecorded domestic tragedies, including unexplained infant mortality and mysterious drownings in the nearby river. When a family moved into the property during the early 1970s, the escalating manifestations reached a level of malevolence so profound that the preeminent researchers of that era were summoned to intervene. Even after decades have passed since those initial traumatic events, the Harrisville homestead remains a forbidden subject for contemporary researchers who understand the limits of physical safety. The ancient Fieldstone cellar in particular continues to exhibit violent anomalies, including the sudden manifestation of putrid organic stenches without any identifiable physical source and extreme thermal plunges that have cracked the optical glass of high-precision camera lenses. Independent investigators who have attempted perimeter vigils reported crushing chest pressure and brief glimpses of hunched, distorted silhouettes rising directly out of the earthen foundations. The consensus among seasoned field veterans remains unchanged. The presence inhabiting that farmstead is not a harmless imprint of history, but an alert predatory force that must not be provoked. Along the windswept and jagged coastline of Maine, historic estates built by wealthy 18th-century sea captains and merchant traders harbor secrets that centuries of salt air have failed to erode. In one particular colonial mansion situated near Kennebunkport, a prominent dynasty accumulated enormous wealth through perilous transatlantic trade routes, while their sprawling residence became the stage for deeply secretive practices. Historical accounts indicate that numerous sailors employed by the family vanished at sea under unexplained circumstances, while the patriarch regularly conducted locked-door gatherings in the upper attic during the most violent maritime nor'easters, entirely hidden from public scrutiny. Modern acoustic teams that attempted to measure sensory data within the sealed attic recorded anomalies that defy every standard law of physics. During high tides, ultra-sensitive directional microphones recorded not only the wind against the slate roof, but the distinct metallic sound of heavy iron chains being dragged across dry floorboards and muffled human sobs emanating from inside the brick chimney flues. In one terrifying incident in 1998, all connecting doors on the primary floor jammed simultaneously with mechanical deadbolts that resisted heavy tools, trapping a team of 3 certified researchers in complete darkness for over 6 hours. Following their extraction by emergency crews, the researchers left their recording apparatus behind on the front lawn and refused to retrieve the stored data. One of the most remarkable and consistent phenomena recorded across all these forbidden New England estates is the systematic degradation of modern electronic equipment. Investigation teams regularly enter these properties with industrial-grade lithium power packs, multi-spectrum cameras, calibrated electromagnetic meters, and infrared sensor arrays, only to watch every device suffer catastrophic power failure within a matter of minutes. This is not a random technical glitch, but a measurable drain where ambient electrical currents are systematically siphoned from battery cells to fuel the physical manifestations taking place within the room. When high-resolution thermal imaging begins rendering human-shaped silhouettes with core temperatures plunging far below freezing while hovering mere feet from researchers. And when audio recorders begin capturing an investigator's own voice speaking words they have not yet uttered, the scientific detachment of the observer is irrevocably shattered. It is precisely in this moment that clinical curiosity gives way to primal instinct. The researcher suddenly realizes that the environment is not a passive subject of study, but an active hunter studying them in return, manipulating their senses and draining their technological defenses to induce total vulnerability. It is this chilling revelation that forces even the most hardened veterans to abandon their posts before daybreak. When one synthesizes the collective history of these mansions across Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Maine, it becomes abundantly clear that these structures have long ceased to be simple wood and stone residences. They have evolved into enduring monuments to suffering, sustained by centuries of trauma, puritanical dread, violent passing, and hidden domestic crimes buried beneath polished floorboards. Modern science possesses sophisticated tools to measure frequencies and document magnetic variances, but it possesses no safeguards against the deep psychological and spiritual toll that an inherently corrupted space inflicts upon the human consciousness. The decision of seasoned investigators to decline access requests, pack up their gear, and turn their backs on these infamous estates is not born of fear, but of profound respect for the unknowable. When individuals who have dedicated their entire careers to pursuing the unexplained choose to walk away and urge others to do the same, they offer an essential warning to the modern world. There are thresholds where the barrier between our reality and something far darker has been permanently worn down, and crossing those lines in search of answers risks disturbing forces that were never meant to be awakened. Now that you know the dark histories behind these New England mansions, and why the world's most experienced investigators refuse to enter their doors, we want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe that certain locations carry a history so dark and volatile that they should be left completely untouched forever? Or should the search for the truth be pursued no matter the psychological cost? Share your theories in the comments below. Let us know if you would ever have the courage to spend a single night alone in one of these properties. And be sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep investigations into the world's darkest historical mysteries.